Have you seen foundation paper piecing? I've done a very simple pattern here. I've got some odd little bits of fabric and I'm going to make this block. The finished size will be 6.5 inches. This line here just shows where that finished part will be. I'm not sure if you've done this before, but you basically follow the order that's on the diagram. This one is going to be in 2 halves. There's part A and part B. So the first thing that I have to do is cut along that line, but I have to remember that I need to add 1/4 inch on to each edge when I sew it back together. I'm just going to cut along that line and then we're going to do part A first. Now you do want to cut these very carefully, and if you get a pattern, really read the instructions well, because some lines you cut on, some lines are just for sewing, so you really have to kind of look what you're doing. Let's put B to one side and we'll start here with A. I'm going to start with 1A, which is that piece right there, which is some kind of sky, so I am going to use blue for it. I have some blue here. And what you want to do is cut pieces that are bigger than what you think you might need. It's very you do actually waste a little bit of fabric doing this, I have to say, and it is tempting to try to cut smaller pieces to try and save, but in the long run you end up just wasting more fabric because you end up having to cut it again. So I'm going to cut a piece that I think will be plenty big enough. So that's way oversized. One thing you need to know about this is that when the piece is finished, it'll be in reverse order. So when I get all this block sewn together, the chimney will be on this side. Turn it over. The first piece that you ever use goes right side up. So it'll go on there like that. I'm just going to lay that there, and then I'm going to look what colour the next piece is going to be, and it's going to be the chimney. So let's find a piece that looks like it would be good for that. Let's do this dark blue chimney. Now you have to know where your line is. I'm just going to put a fold there to try and help me find it. That piece can move back there a little bit. And this piece is going to go right sides together with that. Now I'm going to turn this back over to the front. I'm going to sew along this line. Now when you put these pieces together, you want to make absolutely sure that your fabric extends over this line, both pieces of fabric. So the easiest way to do that is to hold it up so that the light shines through it, and then and then you can see that it is over the line. The other thing to know is you need to put your sewing machine on a small stitch to help the paper tear off when you finish doing this. So I'm just going to sew on this pencil line. Now I've done that, I'm going to fold this back, and then I'm going to trim this 1/4 inch. So I've put this on my cutting mat, and I'm lining it up with my 1/4 inch mark on my ruler, and I'm just going to trim this edge off. And then the next thing I need to do is open this up, take it over to the iron and press it. Now on the other side, remember, I have to remember to leave at least 1/4 inch hanging over at this point for the seam that I'm going to do between piece A and piece B. So I'll go and press that open, and these other extra parts, I'm just leaving those alone for the moment. So I'm cutting a piece for this triangle right here, which is a sky piece. I'm laying that on there. The line I'm going to sew is somewhere along there, so this needs to fold back and make sure that I've got enough space for that. So again, I'm going to hold this up to the light where I can see. can see that that is going to be enough space. Now I'm going to sew down this line here. And now I need to trim this edge to 1/4 inch. So I'm going to fold that back, make sure I keep this one folded back out of the way, put that on there, and just trim that off to 1/4 inch. Lay that out flat. Now, if you want to, as you open these out, you can put a pin in to stop them moving around. Just don't put your pin close to the line you're going to sew on. So I could put that there to hold that down where I want it to be until I put the next piece on. Because the next piece I'm going to put on is this part of the roof. These triangular pieces that I'm sewing on next are always more difficult because of the angle. So you'll see I've actually messed around and pinned this one until I've got it just right. When you turn it over, you have to remember that when you fold it, it doesn't fold evenly. So if I'm going to sew it along the house roof line, which is there, I have to make sure that when I fold it back and hold it up to my light, that you can see the shadow of the cloth covering the whole area that I want to cover. Do you see that? There's the shadow of the cloth there. And also, because this piece here has to be 1/4 inch, that there's extra for the 1/4 inch at the bottom. So I think that that is pinned on there okay. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sew along this line. Okay, so I'm double checking again before I actually cut any of that off to make sure that really is big enough, and it is. Keep it folded out of the way, fold the paper back, and we're going to trim. I think all these extra bits are a bit confusing because you've cut them so big, and you know, you can, if you want to, trim some of those off, but the problem is that you don't want to trim in the wrong place by mistake. It would be really easy to cut the long piece off, so I think even though it looks a bit confusing, it's better just to leave them on there and just trim them as you go along, and you'll see that in the end it all looks perfectly neat. These are taken care of, like those big bits that I've just cut off there. These are all taken care of in the long run. Now that needs to be pressed, and then the next piece is going to be another piece of sky for this area. I've cut this blue piece about the right shape for the sky triangle over here. Getting the machine lines about there. When I fold it back, I'm just going to go hold that up to the light and make sure that I can see the fabric through there, which I can. So let me turn it back over, lay that back down, and then I'm going to take my pin out when I get there. That's just to hold it for a minute, and then I'm going to machine along this line here. So I'm going to take this to the cutting mat, fold that one out the way, fold my paper piece back, now a lot of times people use freezer paper for this. One of the reasons for that is when you iron you can iron the pieces, and it helps, they stick to the freezer of paper a little bit, and it does help hold some of these pieces in place. This roof section is really now all done. Usually I wouldn't trim this down now until I had done the other half as well, but just to show you, I'm going to go ahead and trim this so you can see what it's like. So remember, I had to leave 1/4 of an inch extra on this side for the seam. So let's turn it around and I'm going to cut that first. I guess this is where you tell if you've done it right or wrong. And then all the rest I can actually cut on this heavy line because this is actually my stitching line that'll make the 6.5 inch block size when it's finished. After cutting through all this paper, I'll probably need to put a new rotary blade cutter in and also change the needle on my sewing machine because both will become very blunt doing this. You always make a big mess doing this as well. Alright, there is the roof of my house. And now I'm going to do B, which is the bottom half. And I'm going to start with 1 and 2. 1 is the window and 2 is just the house. I think I'm going to do a light colour for the window, so I've got some light beige. I had to be really careful with this one because it's a little bit of a small piece. Just cut that off out the way. But I just held it to the light and I think it's going to work. This one, right side up. This one, wrong side up. All the rest of the pieces I put on here, I'll be looking at the wrong side. So on the other side, I'm going to machine sew that centre line. That piece is sewn. So I'm going to fold this back out of the way. Fold this one on that line. And trim this to 1/4 of an inch. So the first pieces are on there. Now we do have to remember I have to have 1/4 of an inch overhanging here because we have to remember about adding the 1/4 of an inch for a seam line. So the next one I'm going to do is 3B, this piece right here. I just need a thin strip for that. I only have quite small pieces of this fabric, so I'm having to cut it out of little pieces, which does make it a little bit harder. Okay. Like that, where I think it should go. Where's the machine line? About there. Hold it back. And I'm just going to go and check at the light and make sure that that is actually big enough. I'm also checking the position and I can see looking at that I do need to move that down just a little bit. Just put a little pin in there to hold that in place. And I'm going to go and machine down this line here. Not sure if you can see the mess I'm making as I'm doing this. Probably better if you don't see. I need to take that pin out. There we go. Okay, that is big enough. It's exactly, I would say, 1/4 of an inch. All right, so again, I'm repeating the process. I think one thing that is really important is that you remember to just lay that back down again before you trim this 1/4 inch. Otherwise, you'll just cut off what you've just sewn together. So now I'm just going to trim 1/4 inch along there. That was 3, now we're going to do 4, and it's another strip. And I think I'm not going to show you anymore. I'll go ahead and finish sewing the rest of it, and then I'll show you it at the end. A quick recap on what we're doing here. Follow the numbers in order. So we're going to do 4B, leave a 1/4 inch overhang at the top for a seam allowance. Lay your fabric on here. Make sure it's big enough and check against the light that it's in the right position so you can see it through the sewing line that you're going to use. Machine down this line. Fold your paper back to the sewing line. Measure 1/4 inch and trim. Open it, turn this one back and press. Then you're ready to go on to the next one. So I've got all these parts sewn on now, just one after the other in a straight line, pretty straightforward. The next part I have to do is 7B, and so this goes across the top. I have a thin piece here. Have to be very careful though, because remember I've got to make sure there's a 1/4 inch overlay here. When I put this on and fold it back, I've got to make sure that there's enough, and I think that there will be. Let's try it about there. I'll take that to my light and make sure that that's far enough down to where I'll still have room to fold it back. I'm actually going to put a couple of pins in this piece because I'm just trying to be so careful to make sure that it really is big enough. And yeah, I'm going to have enough there to overhang that, so that'll be fine. I'm going to take my pins out and I'm going to machine along that row. And I'm just going to those 2 points there. And that'll be the edge of my house. Just going to trim off my 1/4 inch. Have to fold my paper down first before I trim my 1/4 inch. There, press that up. I think I'm going to put some of this down both edges. So I just need to cut a couple of strips of this. And I'll just cut that in half. And these are going to be these 2 strips at these ends here. Same procedure again. And just sit that there. Make sure that when it folds over, it covers it, and the same on the other side. And I'll just go ahead and put those 2 on. I'm just trimming these 2 sides off. And I'm going to iron those out. So all I have left to do to this piece now is to trim it to size. Most important thing to remember is 1/4 inch extra at this joining seam. So I'll trim that one first. And then all of these I can actually trim on the dark lines. And the bottom half of the house is done. So all that remains now is that I put these two together and sew the roof to the house. And I have my edge of my paper to tell me the right place to sew. Although it's 1/4 of an inch, it's not going to be wrong really. So the last piece that we need to do now is to peel all this paper off. Because we did a small stitch, that really shouldn't be too difficult. We need to get a pin under here to just lift the edges out of this. There we go. So, you know, it looked such a mess, didn't it, when I was making it, with all those long edges and everything. But you can see that it's just as neat on the back now that it's finished as any other quilting that you do. This kind of foundation piecing, this is actually really good for the kind of patterns where you need to be really precise. This particular design, I probably could have made in lots of ways. It probably didn't need to be paper pieced. Just to show you the method was the reason that I did it, and I wanted to make this little house anyway. I think it's going to take me longer to clear up the mess I've made than it did to make this house. You can buy special paper as well for doing this if you want to, and I've never actually used it. I usually just use what I've got or some freezer paper or something, but that probably is a lot easier as well to tear out than this. So I just need to press this one seam, but as you can see it looks pretty neat at the back, and it's all done and what I wanted on the front. So I'm pretty pleased with that. I'm going to put a border around it and it'll be ready to sew into the quilt that I'm making.